Well, Meta is preparing to block news for some Canadians on Facebook and Instagram, calling it a temporary test. We're joined live now by Ritesh Kotak, tech and cybersecurity expert, to learn a little bit more about this move from Meta. Now, Ritesh, for some, this might seem random, but we do know that this move is most likely linked to Bill C-18. Can you lay a little groundwork on what that is for some who might not know?
Sure. So Bill C-18 is also referred to as the Online News Act. And what it does is it forces big tech, Google, Meta, to negotiate with essentially content creators or news publishers on some sort of model where they get compensated. And the reason for that is these links or the content that news agencies create actually end up creating advertising revenue, and that is definitely a positive. But on the flip side is Meta and some of these big companies saying, well, wait a second, we shouldn't have to pay for it. So that's kind of the basis of C-18, forcing the big tech and news agencies to negotiate to come up with some sort of payment.
Now, tie that into what we're seeing now with this temporary test from Meta. We saw it from Google a little earlier this year. How does this tactic kind of help these bigger conglomerates like Meta or Google?
So what this is this is a protest by Meta, and Google did something similar as well. And it's not just Canada. We saw this in Australia as well, where they say we're actually going to be doing a test. And in this case, what it is, it's 5% of Meta users, so that is people on Facebook and Instagram, are not going to be able to get certain news sources. So if we kind of look at how many people are actually on the Meta platform, you got 24 million Canadians. 5% of that is 1.2 million Canadians for the next month will not be able to access certain verified news content on these platforms.
And critics have been really vocal about this move when Google did it and now with Meta, saying it's an intimidation tactic of sorts. Other government officials saying they're disappointed by the move. Can you talk a little more about that? Do you feel like this is an intimidation tactic from Meta to kind of bully the Liberal government out of Bill C-18?
It clearly is. And they've also come out and said if this bill does become law, which, by the way, it's in its final stages. It's actually in the Senate now, so it's passed the House of Commons. So, yes, Meta saying that we're actually going to get rid of all news content off our site, and that becomes problematic. And why does it actually become problematic is verified news sources you won't be able to access it as a Canadian. However, unverified news sources that don't fall in the act, you will. So we can think about the misinformation, disinformation. How do we decipher fact from fiction? It's going to become even that much harder because lots of Canadians do get their news through these platforms.
We've also been hearing that it could affect other international sites like the BBC, Al Jazeera, as long as you're, again, accessing it from a Canadian computer. My last question here for you, Ritesh. Why is Bill C-18 being championed by the Liberals? Some might not understand, but how does it really help legacy media here at home?
So there's a couple different reasons that have been given. Firstly, the fact that a lot of these big tech companies are making tons of advertising revenue from news content. But on the flip side is that is not getting into the hands of journalists and news creators. And this money is needed in order to create content. Secondly, also is that there's provisions in there to produce Canadian content as well. And the fear is if you take this all away, then the smaller news agencies won't be able to operate. So what it aims to do is gets us into the 21st century, because clearly we've been using 20th century frameworks, and tries to equalize the playing field. But clearly these big tech companies have a lot of power, and they're going to fight it tooth and nail right to the bitter end.
We'll be watching that fight to the bitter end. Ritesh Kotak, tech and cybersecurity expert, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.